And we'll start letting in the
Can you
people
make
in
me
the
a
waiting
co-host,
room.
William, so I can share my screen? Oh,
Oh,
wait.
yes. Are you co-host?
There we go. I got it. Never mind.
There you go.
Thanks.
Hey, all my stuff is on silent. We're good to go. And I'll let you all know as soon as we have a live stream. Okay. I'm going to give it about another 30 seconds, folks, and then we will start the coffee chats. All right. Good morning, folks, in Snohomish County. My name is Gary Clark. I'm President CEO of Economic Alliance Snohomish County, and I am pleased to bring you another Coffee Chats with Economic Alliance. Today's presentation and conversation will be about opportunities for affordable housing and addressing homelessness. We really thank each of you for joining us this morning. If you are one of the folks in our group, please say good morning and tell us what group you're from, and please give your name as well in the chat. This morning, we have an esteemed group of individuals who are very well versed in this space. Number one, we have the Honorable Snohomish County Council Member, District 2, Megan Dunn. Council Member Megan Dunn, thank you for joining us this morning. All right, I think she said good morning. And we have the outstanding Chris Collier of AHA Program Manager, and is an extraordinary focused individual on housing and really eats, sleeps, and breathes this. So Chris, thank you for being here today. And last but not least, we have the outstanding Mary Jane Brell Vujovic, who is the Director of Snohomish County Human Services Department. And I know you affectionately go by MJ. Welcome, MJ. Okay, folks, this is where things get really interesting. We get to find some really rich information about affordable housing and homelessness and the programs by which are being orchestrated and created to try to eradicate those issues in Snohomish County. So without further ado, I would like to allow for our most amazing and outstanding Councilwoman, Megan Dunn, to take the lead here. Megan, take it away. Oh, yep, unmute. Let's make sure we can get her unmuted. There we go.
Okay, it was not letting me. I do know where the mute button is after 3 years, but it was telling me the host wasn't letting me. So not user error. I just want that to be clear. But thank you, Gary, for that wonderful introduction. We're very happy to be here. Very excited to be here, and it's great to see a lot of people joining us today. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to kind of kick us off, and then I'll finish us up at the end too. So we're going to kick us off to kind of talk about why we're here today and what those opportunities are, because we intentionally wanted to call this program Opportunities That Come with Affordable Investments. Affordable housing investments. So what are those opportunities? Why is it important for businesses to know this work? And why is it important for just our economic driver in the county to know, to understand this work and what we're doing? So the first point is economic stability for housing burdened families. So when our families are house burdened, that really leads to uncertainty and stress that decreases productivity. People are more likely to leave the area, quit their jobs. We lose that training, we lose that investment. So Chris is really going to highlight exactly how much that burden is and what that burden looks like for locally. We also know that there's increased social interactions for people when they are living in communities and when they participate in those communities. So people are more likely to vote, they're more likely to be engaged, they fix up their houses, they raise their kids, and they stay here. Next is environmental protections through green housing. That's a really important point for businesses that want to be sustainable. We know that there's new opportunities in green housing initiatives, and a lot of those housing changes that we saw just passed at the state legislature this year, those were supported and proposed by environmentalists. So we're really seeing an overlap of housing and environmental work. And we know that better quality of life attracts businesses and families. If you're here and you're happy, you're more likely to stay here, and we attract new businesses because we have a strong workforce. And that's the #1 reason we see businesses coming to this area, and why businesses stay is because of our strong workforce. So stabilizing the workforce is really important. When people stay and have agency, they're successful, and that creates a stable workforce. And then finally, being able to afford to live where you work is critical. We want teachers, firefighters, librarians, truck drivers, grocery store owners, all the people that support our economy and are part of our community. They need housing options of all types. And if you can't afford to live here, then Chris is going to tell you who you should marry in order to afford to live here. So we're happy to join you today, and we'll do a little technology switch and kick it over to Chris to introduce the next topic.
Well, I've got control of the screen here, so no switching necessary. Thanks for the handoff, Megan. And I will get started with a snapshot of Snohomish County's housing picture to really validate what Megan was saying, and to tee it up for MJ to talk about affordable housing and homelessness. So I'm going to start with how many homes do we have? How many households do we have? So this green bar is the difference between new household creation and new housing unit creation in Snohomish County by year from 2000 to 2022. And in 2003, the call out is you see that we built 1,100 more homes in Snohomish County than new households were created. So a surplus of 1,100. Those homes that are both apartments and ownership opportunities do not get demolished in 2004. They add up into a surplus, right? So 6,422 homes by 2003. If we started counting in the year 2000, you got to start counting somewhere, right? So we have this healthy surplus of housing, that blue bar, that we suddenly erase between 2015 and 2019. I mean, just taking big chunky bites out of that surplus until we're basically in margin of error territory in 2019 for how much surplus housing we have to go around. We have recovered somewhat since then, 735 more homes relative to new households in 2022, but remember, this includes apartments, and there's a lot of apartments getting built in Snohomish County. So I estimate most of these are apartments, new apartment construction. So what I'm showing here is scarcity. This slide is presenting scarcity in the market, and that's the result of that should be prices go up, and indeed they do. This brown line is the median inflation adjusted, and I want to stress that every dollar value here is inflation adjusted. Inflation adjusted sale price for a single family detached home in Snohomish County has risen by over $400,000 in the last 22 years. So that right there tells you a lot of what you need to know. Prices have gone up dramatically. But most to dig deeper into this, most home purchases aren't done with all cash. And so we need a loan. And given loan terms across the bottom, typical loan terms, a 30-year term, 10% down, real property tax figures, real interest rates, and a 33% debt to income ratio. This is the required income to purchase that median home. This yellow line is the required median income to buy the median single family detached home. And you can see how it's gone up from $103,000 to $164,000 in 2022. This spike from 21 to 22 is largely because interest rates rose by 3% and prices did not significantly decrease commensurately. So the required income rose really, really fast. Truly historic. So what I'm showing here is the you must be this tall to ride line. You've got to be this tall to buy the median house financially. So the question is, how tall are we? This purple line is the median inflation adjusted income for a household in Snohomish County. And the answer is we're not tall enough. We've always struggled to be tall enough to get these lines to match. But suddenly in 2020, end of 21, early 22, or through 2022, we really are not meeting the standard. So the degree to which these two lines are diverging is the scope and start of our problem. This is single family housing, and it rolls downhill from here to townhomes and condominiums and to apartments. What does apartment rent look like in Snohomish County? This green line is the average rent for studios to 3-bedroom apartments in Snohomish County, again adjusted for inflation. And more currently, the average rent from January to end of March 2023 was $2,161 for an apartment in Snohomish County. Again, studios to threes. So, and I'm going to come back to apartments in just a moment. But first, let's see. There we go. What sells for less than $400,000? So, looking for single-family homes, townhomes, condominiums across cities in Snohomish County. What sells? How many and what sells for less than $400,000? I'm looking by 5-year groups, so 2000 to 2004. Across the bottom, you see Everett. That's Everett and Marysville are the two I like to point out because they're easier to see. 5,000 homes in that 5-year period in Everett sell for less than $400,000 in today's dollars. That's 85% of all homes sold in the city of Everett. 90% of all homes sold in Marysville are for less than $400,000 in today's value. So we continue. The y-axis is the count, not the percentage. So this is gray is the recession. This is 2010 to 14. Orange is 2015 to 2019. As we recover from the recession, we still have some homes selling for less than $400,000. And then we hit the last 2 years, where Everett goes from 85% of all homes sold are less than 400 to 22%. Marysville down to 8. 291 homes have sold for less than $400,000 between January 1st and December 31st, 2022. Sorry, January 1st, 2000 to December 31st, 2022 in Marysville. Only 291 homes, single family townhome condo. Ownership is increasingly difficult if your financial ceiling is $400,000. And for a lot of households, as I'll show in a subsequent slide, it is. On the insert here, we have all of Snohomish County. 6% of all homes sold in Snohomish County are for less than $400,000, only 1,200. So let's try renting. So what I've tried to show, I've tried to basically take away the opportunity for ownership for lower income households. So let's try renting. Rent has gone up by 68%. Actually, that's an old number now, now that I have 23 data. So but still 68% to incomes 21% increase. So this right here means, we know we're going to have a problem. You don't have to take my word for it, though. The Everett Herald covers this story from a Lake Stevens household in 2021 who saw their rent go up by $475 a month as soon as the governor's eviction and rent increase moratorium ended due to COVID. Their rent went up by $475, and financially speaking, they were pushed out of their home. So I know the average rent in Snohomish County for, this is 2023, is $2,160 a month. I know the square footage of these units at the same time. So a little division, hesto presto, we know it's $2.60 a square foot a month to rent. One bed's $292, two beds $240. So the average between those is $260. Now, okay, that's fine. Let's put that in context. If you bought a home, a single family home in 2021, you paid, given the loan terms I did earlier, you pay $1.58 a square foot a month. If you bought in 2022, even with those huge required income and price hikes in 2022, you're still paying only $2.18 a square foot a month for your mortgage. So you're paying less for more, and you get to take that with you, right? Because when you're a homeowner and you leave your house, you have the opportunity to sell it and recapture some of, or a lot, or perhaps more of, more equity. All that equity you can recapture. That's not an option for renters. So you're paying more for less as a renter. And what I'm trying to show here is how many renters are renting now out of necessity, not choice. And that's something that I really harp on, is necessity, not choice, of being a renter. I was a renter for over 10 years after I graduated from college. Right in the recession, I was moving all over the country for work. That's fine. That was perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with that. But if I'm now renting out of necessity because I have no other option, then I'm incurring a financial debt relative to my homeowning peers that I'm never going to be able to recover from in the span of our lives. 43% of the region's workforce, this is Snohomish, King, and Pierce County's workforce, cannot afford or would find affordable rental rates at $11.50 a month in rent. So pause for laughter, because that doesn't exist. Digging into this number a little more deeply, 43% is 809,000 full-time workers in the 3-county region. And remember, people can drive from home to work, so this really crosses county lines. So the reason I mention this is some people say, well, but I found a great deal on Craigslist. There's not 809,000 deals on Craigslist. So there are deals out there. not to the scope that we need. I want to put this in a little more context. Number of people employed by occupations median income in the 3-county region. So 12,000 people in the 3-county region work in a job where in the middle of that job's career, they will make $208,000 or more. 13,000 people work in a job where in the middle of their career, if they reach mid-career income for that occupation, they will make between 187 and 166 a year. We continue 121,000, 102. At this point, you're wondering, why is the y-axis so tall? Why does this go up to 600,000 people? Oh, that's why. Because 534,000 full-time workers in the 3-county region make, in the middle of their career, middle career income, $62,000 to $41,000 a year. Another 468 make even less than that. And no jobs pay in the middle of their career $28,000 or below, because that's below median wage or minimum wage. So this purple circle is the number of households that can afford to rent on a single income in Snohomish County, 45%. This is occupations that can buy on a single income in Snohomish County. So here's renting and owning together. 53% of the region's workforce can do neither of these things. They can't rent affordably, and they can't own. They certainly can't own. Well, but Chris, we're talking about single incomes. People rightly say, okay, let's combine incomes. We're going to the chapel and we're going to get married just so we can own a house, as Megan alluded to. That still doesn't allow you to buy. If two bottom half average workers, which is half our workforce, if you combine your incomes, the furthest you can get is still 2 income bands away from homeownership in Snohomish County, let alone King. So even if we're combining incomes, you're still only going to be able to affordably rent. Again, renting out of necessity, not choice. So this is the kind of scope of the problem we're dealing with. And let's see what this means for affordable housing. Last slide before I hand it off to MJ. The Housing Authority of Snohomish County a couple years ago asked me to figure out how many households qualify for their services. Section 8 voucher, income restricted housing. I define that as household size of 3 people, that's the county average, making $52,000 a year or less, which is very low income. So I've described a very low income household, and that's 76,000 households in 2021. The Housing Authority of Snohomish County had 6,200 units of assistance at that time to assist them. There's 4,000 Section 8 vouchers and 2,000 apartment units that they own across the county. Everett Housing Authority covers another 3,600. Income restricted housing that the housing authorities do not own is 10,700 more units. And that is it. To the best of my knowledge, this is all of the income restricted housing we have in Snohomish County. It covers about 25% of our qualifying households and leaves 55,000 to figure it out every night. Most of them are severely cost burdened. They're paying 30, 40, 50, 60, 70% of their income to rent every month. They might be doubled up. They might be couch surfing. They might be in a car. They might be living in a tent in someone's backyard with an extension cord running out to the tent. That might be their house. So they figure it out. And it's hard. And it makes them vulnerable and exposed to unexpected expenses, car accident or car breakdown, death in the family, job loss, job injury, injury that leads to job loss, things like that. This is 55,500 households that are vulnerable, that are likely qualifying for services that MJ and the county provide. And I'm closing with this as I hand it off to MJ to encourage you to think about, what does it look like in any kind of job or occupation service provision when you've got a 3-to-1 mismatch of people asking for and receiving services? The system is under intense stress and pressure, and it starts to not break down. I don't want to take away from the great work that MJ and the county do, but it's under great stress. We can't help everybody. And what does that look like? So with that, I'm going to hand it off to MJ, having tried to set things up, and take it away, MJ, and I'll mute myself.
Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you, Gary and EASC for inviting us to come talk with you today. So let's start by just talking at the highest level. What about those 55,000 households? Why are we not building housing for them? Basically, the cost of building housing, land costs what it costs, labor costs what it costs, supplies cost what they cost. The process of running requests to use a land and build housing through jurisdictions. There's a cost associated with that. Basically, we can't build housing for those 55,000 individuals and maintain it for without government intervention. So we have to look at other sources of other than just the open market for addressing those housing needs. Basically, there are three entities that are investing in housing in a significant way in Snohomish County: the two public housing authorities that Chris mentioned and the county. We, all of us, invest a combination of federal, state, and local resources into housing. Some of the resources, some developers have to put together a patchwork of resources in order to build housing, and that includes applying to federal agencies, which could include primarily HUD, also USDA and others. There's housing programs scattered about other agencies, to the state, primarily to Department of Commerce, and to the county for any one of a number of federal, state, and local program dollars. I'm going to stress that the dollars that the county puts into development of those housing, particularly multifamily housing, which is a lot of the rental housing that is being constructed, as we're only putting in a small fraction of the total dollars that a developer has to amass in order to do that. But they're very important dollars because they are often first in dollars and are dollars that then the developer can take to other investors and say, yes, the county is supportive of this project and think that it is viable. So it's a complex process for developers. Usually it's 4 to 5 years from the time that they acquire a piece of property to shovel in dirt and then being able to have people move into the housing. So this problem, this situation Chris has described, is not going to turn around overnight. On to the next page. So where does all of this start? It starts, all development starts with land. And land, it's one thing I learned many years ago in housing: you have to start with land first. You can't do anything without it. So the most powerful tool that for looking at and visioning around land locally is the comprehensive plan that is developed and conformed by the county in conformance with the Growth Management Act, which is state legislation and law of the land. That comprehensive plan is also looks at how that, I believe this was one of the questions, looks at not just Snohomish County. While our focus is on Snohomish County, it needs to align with the Growth Management Act and with the Puget Sound Regional Council's Vision 2050. So there's both a local look, a regional look, and a statewide look at how we use land. The calculus is pretty simple. We are going to have a tremendous growth in population, and we are not going to have any growth in land. So that is part of what has to be taken into consideration in developing a plan update. Is first, it starts with the land. There is a public planning process underway right now looking at this, which the comprehensive plan looks at many things, but it looks at housing as a key issue for all the reasons Chris mentioned to us. And ultimately, the current plan is that plan will be presented for approval to the Snohomish County Council and submission to the state in September of 2024. So there's a lot of things that have to happen between now and then. The required updates will be looking at things like, in addition to availability of land, how many units are needed and what kind of density would we need in order to be able to preserve our quality of life and some of the beautiful green spaces we have in this county while still accommodating growth. I know that sometimes is a source of frustration and tension for folks. The Snohomish County executive likes to say there's two things that constituents don't like: density and sprawl. And that's a conundrum that we all have to, it takes everybody's minds working together to go, how do we thread that needle for those two things? So in response to seeing this program issue coming, Chris, next slide, please. The executive and then Mayor Nicholas Smith, who was then mayor of the city of Linwood, came together and launched the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force, it is now being co-chaired by Mayor Franklin from the city of Everett. All cities and towns are invited to attend, and the vast majority are participating in the Housing Affordability Regional Task Force. That body first took had a number of speakers and presenters come in, including Chris, to provide a picture of the lay of the land in Snohomish County and identify then areas where they could align efforts as well as be able to find out or determine what we could do in conjunction collectively. So next slide, please. The mission has been to collaboratively develop a 5-year plan that identifies priorities for county and city governments to accelerate our collective ability to meet the housing affordability needs of all residents and set a foundation for continued success through 2050. One of the challenges was that there's a recognition that at all income levels, there is not adequate housing, although the problem and the issue is most acute at the lower income levels in this county, as Chris's presentation has pointed out. So how do we address that issue of affordability? There was a lot of discussion about what constitutes affordability. The standard definition is that it means that no one is paying more than 30% of their income on housing and utilities. If they are paying more, they're considered housing cost burden, as Chris pointed out. If they're paying more than 50%, they're considered severely housing cost burden. At the upper income levels, that has a different implication than it does at the lower income levels, where people are choosing, do I keep a roof over my family's head or do I have medical care? So very, very pressing decisions that people are having to make. Next slide, please. After months of getting together, the group came up with this as a dense slide, and we're going to be sharing this with Gary and William so that they can share it with all of you as well. They came up with 8 different action items that they could start taking immediately in 2022. Okay, this was, they came up with these action items at the tail end of 2019, and some things started happening in March of 2020 that impacted our ability to keep moving this work forward, but collectively the jurisdictions did continue moving a lot of this work forward, even during the challenges of the past 3 years. The conversations with the cities and housing authorities that are in this plan have been underway. How do we all work together to ensure more availability of more housing? Many jurisdictions passed House Bill 1406, as did the county, which is a piece of legislation that creates a new funding stream to both create affordable housing and keep people in their homes in the smaller jurisdictions. And now, as of the most recent legislative session, across the board, keep people in their homes. We need to not have more people entering into homelessness because they can't afford to stay where they are. And the vast majority of people who are evicted for income reasons. The evictions have been climbing here and nationally since the end of the moratorium. Well, in many ways, as a public health crisis, we've moved past COVID in terms of people's lives and getting back on track. Many households have not. There have been a number of educational activities going on at constituent policymaker levels, and we're using a number of new and expanded tools coming out of the legislative session that has just ended, and will be using tools so that we were able to develop and refine those communication plans. It's very important, one of the things that was very important to the legislators was being able to explain that our choice is not between growth and staying the same. It's between growth in a planned way and growth in an unplanned way. And we need to be planned for that growth. So, and since HART has developed this plan, legislator has provided, and this session that just ended will be providing more, but they already have provided a new and powerful tool for helping us address that gap that Chris has identified for 55,000 people. And that was House Bill 1590. It was passed in, next slide, please. It was passed in 2019. It was clarified in the following year's legislative session. And in April of, or in the end of 2021, the Snohomish County Council passed the motion to start collecting the tax that we're talking about here. And we began collecting that tax in April of 2022. So what does the bill allow? We're collecting funds for constructing and acquiring affordable housing for low-income households with additional needs. I'm going to say constructing and acquiring is the acquiring language here is really important. There's been some quite a bit of naturally occurring it's called low rent housing that rents below $800 a month in Snohomish County, but we are losing that housing faster than just about anywhere in the country. So acquiring housing as well as developing it is critical. Constructing and acquiring emergency housing, behavioral health facilities, operating and maintaining these facilities. Now, a lot of times legislation that's passed will allow you to build something, or they will give you money for maintaining, or they will give you money for providing services to people, but rather usually they are not comprehensive and address all three. This piece of legislation addresses all three, so developers don't have to go scrambling and owner-operators of properties don't have to go scrambling for resources from other places to make sure that the housing that they're building is viable and provides services they need. And it allows for evaluating the services provided. Chris, please, next slide. So what do we think that having passed this tax is going to do? Well, over the first 5 years, it's 4.75 years, it will generate $116 million in revenue. That is significant. It's the most powerful tool that we have had at the local level for helping to developers develop affordable housing. And the 5-year projected expenditures. So the Snohomish County Council asked before passing this that we developed a what if business plan that would say, with these revenues over 5 years and what are the allowable activities, what is a possible scenario for how these resources get spent? So the original 5-year projection, which was done in a draft business plan, said out of that $160 million the first 5 years, we'd spend $97 million and maintain a significant reserve because when you start up a new fund like this, you need to see how the fund is going to work. And that expenditure breakdown was $48 million in affordable housing without services. I'm going to jump over to another bridge and permanent supportive housing because we actually, while bridge and permanent supportive housing are forms of supportive housing, the business planning you have to do around them needs to be somewhat different because they have a higher cost to operate and maintain, and you do need to attach services to that kind of form of housing. Another $4 million set aside for behavioral health facilities, and with the intent of matching some of those with dollars from the chemical dependency and mental health sales tax. Some have asked why not more for behavioral health facilities, why the focus on affordable housing, and that's because the council passed several years ago another 1/10% tax for chemical dependency and mental health or substance use disorder and behavioral health services. So there is already a piece of legislation out there in order to be able to work on building and serving people, buildings for and serving people with behavioral health challenges. Another $13 million for services for people living in bridge and permanent supportive housing. I know one of the questions was, what do you do for housing for people with developmental disabilities and delays, behavioral health challenges, people who need more than just a roof over their head. That bridge and permanent supportive housing is a housing that provides those kinds of supports, including 24-hour-a-day services. So those dollars are there. And about $750,000 to evaluate the efficacy of all of those efforts. So basically, the county is, the next steps in that process are that we held 8 or 9 listening sessions around the county for what do you think of this first what if scenario? How might it be improved, enhanced, or changed? We have collected a lot of feedback on that and have been compiling that feedback. We haven't gone into moving to changes yet because legislature went into session and started looking at a lot of powerful tools and things that could impact still further how that revised plan will be developed. So the session is just ended. We'll be looking at what are the implications of that for where we need to spend these dollars. And we'll be looking at what council reviews and ultimately passes in terms of expending the last of the American Rescue Plan resources in this arena. And once we have those pieces of information and the feedback from everybody, we'll be coming back and revising this plan and presenting to council for their consideration and refinement and then appropriation of dollars so that we can start putting those dollars out on the street. So this is the most powerful tool we have been given since I've been doing housing work in this county to help. It will not fund all the housing that we need, but it will certainly help accelerate the rate at which we can produce affordable housing, particularly for folks at the lowest income levels, people with the highest level of vulnerability in this county. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, in addition to addressing the issues of housing, which are very present, one of the top considerations and concerns of people in this county is what are we doing to address homelessness above and beyond housing? As I mentioned in the previous talking about housing, first and foremost, the best thing we can do is help people, keep people in their homes so that they don't become homeless and on the streets. We do an annual point in time count that in the most recent count, we're still tabulating the data from the most recent count held this past January, but the one from the count before had 584 people who were literally on the street experiencing homelessness on a given night. Now that's an undercount. It is a single day count and it is affected by all kinds of things. Was there a cold weather shelter open that night? Well, then somebody would not count in literally street homeless on that night, but they will be on the may have been the following night. Are people feeling comfortable and safe to come in and have themselves counted? Some people choose not to be counted, but it has been a count that's been underway for the past decade and is probably the best single indicator that we have, with the exception of 1 year of the pandemic, and is probably the best single indicator of whether we are or are not making significant inroads into addressing the issue. The short haul is, while we have been serving more people, getting more efficient and more effective at serving people, we are not making significant inroads because we do not have enough housing. So the first order of business, let's make sure we're keeping people who are in homes in the homes that they're in. The county has distributed, I think it's right now at about through our partners, Volunteers of America and Cocoon House, which we couldn't absolutely not have done this without their tremendous efforts on behalf of the entire county, about $150 million in rental assistance to keep people in their homes during the pandemic. The state legislature is going to be providing more resources or has provided for more resources so that we can continue that work going forward. We also invest in dispute resolution services and legal services to help households that are potentially on the pathway to eviction. The more that we can help address those issues between the landlords and the people who live in housing and keep them in their homes, the more we can focus on addressing literal homelessness with the dollars that we have available. So there is in this county what is called a homeless housing system. The system exists nationally. It's called the Continuum of Care nationally. It's led in our county by the Partnership to End Homelessness, which is a body of about 50 different organizations representing all different kinds of concerns, interests related to homelessness, to be able to come together and create with their collective wisdom a plan for addressing homelessness to the extent that we can with the resources available. And all of our indicators are, I think there's a question about how do we measure what we're doing. Well, the primary measures that we are given by our federal and state funders are about, are we effective at delivering services to the people we are seeing? They are less about whether we are making broader community impacts, because they recognize that those are due to macroeconomic conditions outside the control of the homeless housing system. But we are constantly looking to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the services that we are providing. So if we can go on to the next slide. So we are, in addition to all the existing efforts to end homelessness, and I'm going to mention that Snohomish County is one of a handful of continuum of care in the nation that has received sort of the gold standard status offered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development called the Unified Funding Agency, which gives us much more flexibility and additional resources in how we address the issues here in our communities. And that could not happen if it were not for the tremendous partnerships and efforts of all of us working together collectively. So in addition to all the resources, and that's probably at this point, we're up to about $12 million, and that includes programs specifically for youth and other populations facing significant challenges once they become homeless. We're going to be using ARPA, American Rescue Plan funds, the local funds available to us, and have begun using those funds. Those funds are coming in two ways. The first wave was spent on purchasing 2 motels, one in Everett, one in Linwood, to be able to provide housing to people who are literally homeless and on the streets. So I asked, why would we buy motels, especially when those motels need extra work? We knew before buying them, we had them tested. We knew that they would need some upgrades, and we knew that they would need to have remediation for methamphetamine, reduce the price accordingly, that we pay for those motels. But why would we be buying motels? Because it's the fastest way to get roofs over people's heads. Even though it will take us probably 1.5 years to get those really ready to be safe and healthful environments for people to live in. Again, at the outset, we talked about 4 or 5 years minimum to be able to build stick-built housing. So it is still the most expedited way to get people into housing. And we are working with a number of counties and with other cities in the county to co-invest ARPA funds. Not only did Snohomish County get these funds, but so did a number of jurisdictions in the county. If we could go to the next slide. Before we go on to that, we'll talk a little bit more about these motels. Oh no, go ahead to the next slide. I'm sorry, Chris. Having little conducting issues here. So of the 2 motels we purchased, the America's Best in Eminence with 55 units and 74 units in Days Inn. Obviously, this can get a number of people off the streets in these 2 different communities of highest density and where some of the highest concentration of people experiencing homelessness are. Next slide, please. So what are we doing in these motels besides putting roofs over people's heads? Well, we're going to have a wide range of services available to people in these motels, which start with on-site 24/7 staffing. We'll be serving people who are literally homeless with a robust array of services to be able to help people. This is not intended people's permanent homes, but as a place to have them live while waiting. Okay, we can answer some of those questions at the end, but again, the 24/7 staffing will also include on-site security and management of on-site security, as well as people will have to adhere to a code of conduct in these motels. And the services that will be offered on site: employment assistance, behavioral health, hygiene, healthcare, legal resources, benefits assistance, and transportation. I think I was looking at a number yesterday that 40% of people who are literally homeless on the streets are working. Many people, there's a lot of misperceptions of who's on the streets. Some people absolutely do have behavioral health challenges, and we intend to offer the services to help them be able to address those challenges. But all the research says that you've got to get a roof over people's heads and get them stable before you can, in most instances, be able to help them make advances in other areas of their lives. Next slide, please. And there's a great deal of property management that will be going on, as I mentioned. There'll be a facility maintenance, ground maintenance, janitorial, housekeeping, security will be a big consideration. Right now, we have securities at those properties, even though they're not yet occupied. Code of conduct developed in partnership with the entity that we contracted to manage the property. And we have been seeking input from community partners, have been doing a robust outreach effort to determine what is needed in terms of fencing, furnishing, storage, staff areas, meeting space, kitchen and laundry, ways to increase facility durability, and a wide variety of other areas. So if we could go on to the next, one of the concerns has been in the more areas where there is a higher concentration of people experiencing homelessness, are we also addressing needs in other communities within the county? And the answer is yes. In addition to the city of Edmonds and Everett with the 2 motels, with Edmonds, we're also co-investing in their household support grant program for households experiencing homelessness, co-investing with the city of Everett on their pallet shelter program and their case management program, also with Linwood on their rapid rehousing program, and a program that they have to support McKinney-Vento students. Those are students in households that are experiencing homelessness. Co-investing with the city of Marysville on emergency shelter program. They are looking for households in which to be able to do that. We're also working with Housing Hope and a number of other partners and the 2 community colleges, so that children in households that where there are McKinney-Vento students, that is, are experiencing homelessness, can enter into community college and stay on campus and be safely and stably housed while on campus, which definitely will increase the likelihood that they are able to complete training and obtain certificates and degrees and enter the world of work. So a number of things going on throughout the county to address these challenging issues. I would be remiss if I were to say we were going to address all of these overnight. It took us decades to get into this situation. It will take a long time to turn this around, but I think collectively everybody's working on it, and we're going to get some new tools with the state legislature this session. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Councilmember Dunn to talk about actions that you can take to become involved.
Thank you, MJ. And then we're happy to answer questions. Yeah, we wanted to just, share that there's ways to get involved with the comprehensive plan. So MJ talked about that process. It's a 10-year update. Yeah, thank you. So it's just a 10-year update. It really sets the values for development and planning in our county. There's a public process for this update, and we really want your input and information. You can also email state legislatures, no problem. Also follow the advocacy groups that are supporting these efforts, including HEART, that process, and the Partnership to End Homelessness. And then we'll also have county updates for the hotels and how that program is moving forward. There's been a lot of misinformation around those hotels, so we really wanted to make sure that people were aware of what's being done and actions taken there. So we are happy to take questions. And I think one more slide shows our contact information.
All right. Thank you, Megan, MJ, and Chris. I believe we have a few questions queued up, but before we dive into those, I think there may have been at least one question that I captured. And there was one that was asking about the hotels, MJ. How will these hotels be monitored to ensure that they do not become overtaken by drug use and illegal activities?
Right, well, the intent is, and the motels will have 24-hour security. There will be intakes done with folks, people to understand what the code of conduct is, assigning or agreeing to that code of conduct, ongoing monitor and safety checks within the motels. And again, many people who need housing who are on the streets are not engaged in illicit activities. They simply do not have enough income to keep body and soul together. But we, there are some various housing developments that have been created for people who are in need of supported housing around the county, and a great deal of learning from them and some experienced providers to be able to manage that work.
All right, thank you, MJ. I just wanted to add a note here on the hotel piece. So in 7th grade, I was in American Inn Hotel with my father in Bethesda, Maryland. It was a social service program to place homeless folks who had children. And so I think this program is very, it's reminiscent of my experience in that space as well. I do have a question here from, let's go to our direct question, which is more about what are some of the biggest challenges in providing affordable housing and what measures are being taken to address them? So just a general piece for the panel.
A quick tidbit before, I think MJ can probably answer that is the going cost for a door or a unit of income restricted housing these days is about $400,000.
Mhm.
$400 to $500,000 a door. So, let's just take that 55,000 number I threw out there in my section. Just multiply by $400,000. Like, oh, that's a lot of money. Set aside where are you going to get the land? Where's that going to be? And is it going to be the right size and configuration and all that stuff? Just the amount of money that it will take to make a real dent in this is huge. And that's a huge part of it. It's all about the money. When it comes to affordable housing, it's always about the money. You've got a household that can't swim in the private market rental price, and so how are you going to close that gap, right? How are you going to give them a place to live that the building can still function, you can still keep it up, maintenance and operations. How are you going to close that delta between what they can pay and what you need to operate the property? Recognizing you also need a reserve fund and all those things, and it all comes down to money. It's all about the money, one way or the other. How you get the land, how you do the permitting, how you fund the operations and maintenance, so on and so forth. So that's a huge challenge. And I'll leave it there if MJ and Megan want to jump in.
No, I think you covered it really well, Chris. I would add too that there's just that with every jurisdiction, there is a process that you need to go through once you identify land. How can the land be used? For a developer, if they're developing in one jurisdiction, the rules are different in another. So it can be time consuming to learn how to do that development in different jurisdictions. But it starts with the land and the resources to build on that land.
Yeah, and I think we have some tools that we can look at, like looking at land trusts where maybe a land is owned by a public entity and then the home is owned. So that lowers the price for homes. And we have done a few tweaks as far as like infill for allowing ADUs and DADUs in our urban areas that can help bring down housing somewhat, but that's kind of chipping away at the problem. So looking at bigger sweeping issues, there was a question about rent control, things like that would have a bigger impact, but that's not an authority we have at the local level.
All right. We just have time for a few more questions, so I'll try to get to some of the chat questions. There's a question for Megan. You mentioned there being a lot of misinformation about the hotels. Could you run through some of the little myth-busting options?
Yeah, and I would encourage MJ and Chris to add to this, but I would say the biggest one is, especially here in Everett, that people assume that people that are experiencing homelessness came from another area. If you look at that point in time count, there's a great infographic that shows they asked 150 people in Everett, and they answered, where was your last permanent residence? And I think it was 140 people out of those 150 people said my last permanent residence was in Everett. So most people that you are seeing are your neighbors, are people that have experienced financial troubles or other issues, and they're here because of economic reasons. And that's the other big one, is that we assume everyone who's homeless has a drug addiction or a mental health concern. So how people became homeless, I think, is one of the biggest myths we're seeing, and who those people are. So a lot of people are working poor or are working homeless, and veterans, like, we should not have to know that we have any vets that are unhoused is just a failure to me. But I would encourage MJ to add more.
No, I think, Megan, that really covered a lot of the issue. The other thing I think is, there are folks who there's always a question of, do you do treatment first or housing first? It's not an either or, it's an and, but most people cannot fully benefit from treatment when they do have behavioral health challenges if they do not have a stable roof over their heads, because they're spending all their time and energy thinking about, where am I going to sleep tonight and where am I going to get my next meal? If you can help solve that for people and let them know that the expectation is that where you're staying this is not forever, this is for you to get your feet under you and move forward, it gives people a chance to do that. Will everybody? No. Will many? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I have another question here. And I think this is probably in connection to our business community as well. So what is the latest on addressing middle housing gap, the middle housing gap? So just open that to the group.
Well, I was just reading about this last night. The legislature did pass House Bill 1110, which will basically, depending on the size of the jurisdiction, create require jurisdictions to do more higher density infill within single family neighborhoods or within many of those around the state. It has been somewhat controversial, but it has also looking around the country, where are jurisdictions most successfully addressing the challenges and of rapid growth and still maintaining the quality of life within the jurisdictions. And it has been, this has been one of the most effective practices. So they did just pass that in the session that ended at midnight on Sunday.
Thank you. Anyone else want to dive in? Chris?
Yep, I just put a response in the chat. So House Bill 1110 is the state's action on that. Just to summarize, it requires that cities allow up to a duplex on all residentially zoned land unless it is a quarter mile around a major transit stop, which is everything from bus rapid transit to commuter rail, light rail, so on and so forth. That does not cover the cities of Snohomish, Stanwood, Monroe, and further afield. So it's basically allow middle housing, low density middle housing. And there's also the provision that if the developer can figure out how to make it work, if you can put one affordable unit in that, then you can go up to 4 units instead of 2. So trying to mix in some of that affordability in there. So that is the latest on middle housing in Washington State. It just passed. I don't think the governor signed it yet even. So no, we're not going to see impacts from that for quite some time, years even, as developers try to figure out how to make it work and actually get stuff built. So keep an eye on that, but that's what has just happened, like almost yesterday.
Outstanding, outstanding. So we're down to our last few minutes here. And so what I'd like to do is allow for our panelists to give some parting thoughts to you all. We'll start where we finished off with Chris giving a final thought, and then MJ, and then last but not least, Council Member Dunn.
Yeah, so what I'll end with is, people have asked, like, well, why don't we do more about this? Like Kate's great question about state rent control, or people talking about middle housing. We're in this space, in this discussion, we're all very positive. Why don't we do something? Why don't we do more? If you could have seen the fighting that I saw, firsthand around House Bill 1110, for example, in the state, I mean, it was fierce. It was fierce. Ask a city, like, hey, why don't you pass a multifamily tax exemption? That's scratching a wound off a city that I know is in here right now. It was fierce, and that multifamily tax exemption would have increased everyone's taxes in that city by 95 cents a year for the proposed project. It was fierce. 2 hours of public meetings in one night, and so at the end of the day, we're going to have to do things that are unpopular. You can see that they are unpopular, but they're necessary. And I wouldn't say that it's like universal unpopularity. A lot of people here are saying, why don't we do more? And we've got to recognize that this is necessary. It's very needed. It's needed not just because of the human stories, the kids that are struggling and maybe homeless right now, that will eventually grow into roles of great responsibility. I'm looking at you, Gary. It's not just for that. It's also for your economy. It's also for your workforce. If you're an employer and you're struggling to hire people, this is for you too. If you care about the environment, this is for you too, because, just to close with a little more data, the number of people that drive single occupancy vehicles more than 30 minutes to get to and from work, and they take more than 30 minutes to get there, is a lot, and it's going up. If you care about the environment, you care about housing, but still, housing and housing change, this systemic change, is not a popular thing until people really get to understand it. And so we have to recognize that, and we still have to do it. So I'll hand it off to MJ.
Thank you, Chris. And you've said a lot of what I would have said. I think, we are at a time where, and I've gone to community meetings as well, where people are angry and afraid, and they're afraid about what exists now. And the only thing I can say is what will come is going to be that much worse if we do not address the issues we're facing now. It's we are in some ways going off into the unknown, but I think the more that each of us can recognize there, but for fortune, more and more of us are falling into that situation. We need to be able to look at our neighbors and say, what can we do to help our neighbors? We really are all in this together. I've spent 50 years in human services. When I first started in this business, we really thought that we could make positive changes for the better. I still, here's 50 years later, because I still believe that's the case. Right now, we are really focused on helping mitigate human suffering for those we do touch. We need to be able to do more and do better. And all of us, business community, individuals, all of us will do better by addressing these problems. As Chris said, all the solutions aren't going to be popular. There's a lot of things here that are scary, but what will come if we don't come together is more frightening still.
Outstanding, MJ. Councilwoman Dunn.
Yeah, I would say it's also a really complicated topic because we're going over time, so we should probably have a part 2 to this because there's so much to cover and so much to talk about. Gary, having your leadership and advocacy has been really important and really heartfelt. So we really appreciate your work in this area and how important it is to have our businesses and economic alliances part of this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dunn. I really appreciate your passion for this work and effort. I think each of you realize that in order for us to have a sustained, successful community in Snohomish County, that we need to make sure that our people are doing well. And as we close here, I want to just note that for our business community, this is a high priority to make sure that we have, number one, citizens that have the ability to be successful and to think beyond just where they lay their heads. And that is how we get folks to establish businesses, to think of entrepreneurial opportunities, to spend money in places outside of just housing. And so this is a paramount importance. So I thank each of you, our panelists, for joining us today. We're going to just highlight really quickly some things that are coming up. I do know that we have Councilwoman Paula Ryan on. I know we have Mayor Linda Redmond from Snohomish County, or Snohomish, City of Snohomish. We also have Commissioner Jim Orvis on. And so I just want to thank those of you who are leaders who joined us. There she is, Mayor Redmond as well. So thank you all for joining. And I see Councilwoman Ryan doing dual duties there as well on screen. Folks, we are thankful for your time. I just have a few notes and then we're going to do our amazing coffee send-off. Our forecast, our economic forecast and annual meeting is tomorrow. So if you haven't registered, please do. It starts from 11 to 1, but if you show up at 10:30, you'll get a good seat. Also, there'll be an opportunity to hear about our legislative update and review, and that will be following, it'll be actually on May 9th from 8:30 to 9, and we'll have our very own Rashma Agarwal, who is our government relations lead, to give that wrap-up update. Folks, we're going to go to our general screen here. If you have water, juice, coffee, or otherwise that we can't announce on screen, please rise your cups up. And really, really want to thank each of our panelists today, Chris, Council Member Dunn, and the amazing MJ. Makes me think of Spider-Man, MJ. But at any rate, folks, this has been an amazing coffee chat conversation. Please have an amazing day and look out for your fellow citizens and your business community. Thank you.